Thank you so much. We're obviously going to talk about the foster care case that you just argued, Fulton versus Philadelphia. And can you just, for anyone who hasn't been following this case, talk a little bit about why it's such an important religious liberty case?
Absolutely, Kathryn, and thank you so much for having me on and for continuing to talk about that. I know with the election, everybody's been distracted. I was actually talking to my sister last night, and she mentioned something about last week. I was like, what happened last week? Oh, yeah. It honestly took me a second. Because obviously when you've got this case was argued by phone to the Supreme Court the morning after the election. So obviously when you're thinking about that, it tends to occupy the attention. But this is an incredibly important case because it really has to do with the future of foster care and adoption and how we're going to continue serving and helping those children and those families who desperately need that help. So Fulton v. City of Philadelphia is about Sharon L. Fulton and Tony Sims Bush, who are longtime foster moms in the city of Philadelphia. Sharon L. has fostered over 40 kids and adopted a number of them. Tony Sims Bush has fostered several, adopted two of the most adorable boys you've ever seen. And they're supported by and really depend on their agency, Catholic Social Services. And in 2018, the city of Philadelphia said it would no longer allow Catholic Social Services to place children with families and support those families because of its religious beliefs about marriage. And so for 2 years, we've been in the courts fighting this out. We were so encouraged back in the spring when the Supreme Court agreed to hear this case. Because for 2 years, they've been shut out of the foster care system, and foster moms like Sharon L. and Tony have really been at a loss for what they're going to do next. And so we were really encouraged. The court took the case and very encouraged by the way that oral argument went last week.
This case, I can't emphasize enough to people, is bewildering in one respect. You know, at the same time that the city of Philadelphia said there's a foster care crisis and they need more families, they cut off the relationship with this highly respected agency, the Catholic Social Services. That aspect of it, Lori, I've been struck during this whole process, is very clearly, it weighs on your heart. This isn't just a job, for you.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think that's a great way to describe it. I've been honored to work with Becket for 15 years now doing religious liberty cases. And there are a few cases that really do literally keep you up at night. And this has been one of them because it's heartbreaking to have to explain to your clients again and again, we're going to keep fighting. But I can't stop this today. And, just as you said, and I was really happy to hear some of the justices ask about exactly this point at oral argument. The same week that Philadelphia said, okay, no more kids placed with Catholic Social Services, no more kids placed with any of their families, they put out an urgent call for 300 more foster families to join the system. So here you have dozens of families who work with Catholic Social Services, and the city saying, no, we're just not going to put kids in those homes, which is shocking. And at the time that happened, the city even admitted they had 250 kids who were not in family homes and needed to be. So they're in group homes, maybe in institutions, and need, to comply with the law and for their own good to be placed in a family home. And the city saying, no, we don't care that families are open and available with Catholic Social Services. Unless their agency changes their beliefs about marriage, we're not going to place kids in those homes. And it was just stunning that they would make that decision.
And the stunning nature of that too is that there was no complaint. There was, I think people have the assumption because so many of the headlines were about LGBT rights, right? There was no gay couple that came to Catholic Social Services. This is like an academic experiment that's impacting people's lives.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this actually came up several times at the argument. I was really glad to see that the court was very much aware of this fact and was, really pushing the city of Philadelphia on, why did you need to do this? Because that's exactly right. There had been a reporter, there was a story going into the Philadelphia Inquirer, And there was a reporter who called up the agency and asked, well, what is your policy on this? And they stated what their policy was, that they couldn't endorse a marriage or cohabiting relationship that was contrary to Catholic teaching. But if anybody asked them, they would help them to find another agency who would be happy to serve them. And yet that wasn't enough. And just because this article came out in the paper, you suddenly had the city council passing a resolution condemning it. You had the mayor calling for an investigation. You had the commissioner investigating religious agencies, not secular agencies, just religious agencies on this issue. And then within a week saying they would no longer place any children through Catholic social services. And so it's really stunning how quickly you saw the entire city apparatus react to this when, just as you say, there had not even been a complaint.
And this, isn't it fundamentally what so many of these religious liberty battles are about? You've argued for the Little Sisters of the Poor, among others at the Supreme Court. And I mean, we're talking about an intolerance toward certain beliefs. And we're obviously, there's that election thing that happened, and there are different worldviews, and but one of the great things about America is I feel like I'm, in civics in the 6th grade, and, is that we can like argue with one another and have different beliefs, but still live together, right? But there's something about that that's getting lost today, isn't it?
I think that's exactly right. And, I think we all have people that we know and love who have different beliefs, and yet we somehow are together as friends, as family, whatever it may be. And that's, I think the problem here is this idea that it has to be a zero-sum game, that the people who disagree with you can't just disagree with you and be left alone like the Little Sisters of the Poor. Or like Catholic social services, that no, you have to actually go and force them to do the thing that is contrary to their beliefs,
right,
or else fine them or exclude them. And it's really disturbing. And I thought, it's ironic, I think, that this happens in the city of brotherly love. And you look at the history of Philadelphia, and it's a beautiful history. This is a colony that was established by William Penn as a place for religious dissenters, because he had been persecuted as a Quaker in England, and really allowed people of different faiths to come together in this city and to live together. And the idea that you had a model of something that was really radical at the time was you can have people of different religious beliefs and they can all come together and form one body politic, and we don't all have to agree. And, this is a city where, following that tradition, the Catholic Church opened an orphanage and started taking in kids during a yellow fever epidemic 200 plus years ago. And they've been doing that ever since. And so I think it's really sad to see where Philadelphia has gone today after such a beautiful beginning.
Right. Before COVID, I travel between New York and Washington often, and I always notice Drexel all over the buildings in Philadelphia. You don't even have to get off the train. And Kathryn Drexel was a saint who lived in Philadelphia, died the year National Review was established, actually, 1955. So she feels so close in our history. It just seems such a denial of some of the greatest of our history, but probably speaks to our limited attention spans when it comes to history too. Our culture is reflecting that here. Lori, what have you learned about foster care in the course of working on this case?
Oh goodness, so much. I, like so many people, had only limited exposure to an understanding of foster care system when they started out doing this, and really talking face to face with women like Sharonell and Tony and Cecilia Paul, who's another one of the, powerful examples in this case. And I know you've written about her, Kathryn. She passed away while this case was going on. She was in her 80s. She cared for over 130 foster kids, and was still taking care of newborns into her 80s, which I can't imagine. I feel like I'm too old to do that. But she would do. She said, it's like my cup of coffee, is what gets her up. And to see the city of Philadelphia leave her, for the last part of her life without being able to care for these kids was really sad for her, and was so sad to watch. But I think, what really struck me is just the strength of these foster families and foster moms. And, I have foster clients in Michigan as well. I know you've, had Melissa Buck and spoken with her, and, they are tenacious, because you have to be. You welcome these children into your home. In many cases, you're open to adopting them as your own, but you don't know if that's going to happen. The first goal is to see if they can be reunited with their mother and father, and to try and support and love that family and love those kids regardless of what the outcome is. It takes real strength. And I think that's, one reason why it's so important to have an agency like Catholic Social Services or like St. Vincent Catholic Charities in Michigan, is these families are doing this incredibly difficult job. And they need support, they need help, because they're out there caring for these children who've been abused, who've been neglected, who don't know what's going to happen next in their lives. And they're willing to bring them into their homes temporarily, and then perhaps in many cases permanently. And it's such an important ministry, and it's such a difficult one, that I'm just in awe of the families who do this.
And kind of furious about anybody who, because of politics, wants to take away some of these resources that these families need, these children need. As you point out, Lori, it is very difficult, because every child in the foster care system has some kind of level of trauma at best. There's so much mental illness and so many things that factor in, especially if there was abuse involved and all of these things. To expect people to do this without qualified resources to lean on is just would be impossible.
It would be. And I think it really speaks to how those relationships are so important, because this is not just somebody who's in your life for a brief period of time. These foster parents are continuing to work with these agencies. They get to know the agency social workers and the agency staff, and they really depend on them. And in turn, the agencies know, okay, we see this situation out here. You know what? I think so and so, they have room in their home. They'd be great. So let's go to the city and see if they would be able to take in these kids. And they're able to do that. And they're also able to look out for, if you have a sibling come into the system, which is a pretty common thing to happen, they're able to have the knowledge there to say, oh, guess what? This child's brother is already in our care. Why don't we reunite these siblings and bring them together? They have that kind of expertise to do that. And I think one of those powerful stories we heard, and Sharon Ellis still has a hard time talking about this to this day, was a number of years ago. Goodness, it's probably been close to 20 years ago. No, it hasn't been 20. It's been closer to 10 years ago now. She took in some children on Christmas Eve, and it was just a horrible situation and really heartbreaking. But they got the call on Christmas Eve, and Catholic Social Services said, "Can you do this?" And she said yes. And so she took these children into her home on Christmas Eve, coming out of a really horrible situation. And, the CSS workers were there not just to make sure those children got there, but, they didn't have anything but the clothes on their backs. And so they went out and got Christmas presents and wrapped them and brought them to Sharon L's home so that they would have something to start off with, and some semblance that there's a person out there who loves them and who cares for them and is thinking about them at this time. And I think that's really the powerful thing about what they're doing, is they're showing these kids that there's someone who loves you, who's thinking of you, and who's going to be there to support you.
One of the things that I don't think that people fully appreciate when we're talking about religious liberty is how integral to the identity of a believer obviously that faith plays. But when you think about Christianity, there's so many references in the Bible to widows and orphans, right? And Christians believe they've been adopted by God the Father, and there would be no way to operate as a Christian without answering the call to be foster parents, to open your home, the hospitality. Have you seen that sort of penetrate the coverage, or is this something people don't fully understand?
I think that for people who are in Christian and other religious communities, they often make that connection like, oh, I get it. Like, I know why we do this. I think for people who are outside of those communities, sometimes it's hard to understand, well, why does the religious faith matter? And sometimes people are more understanding when it comes and you start talking about minority faiths. It's one thing that is an issue here where you have Jewish groups who've come out in support of Catholic social services because they've said, look, when there's an Orthodox Jewish child who comes in the system, we want to have an Orthodox Jewish family for them to go to who understands their life and their religious practices. And it's the same thing with the Muslim community. They want to have Muslim homes available. So when that child goes in to a home, there's someone who's familiar and who understands what their life is like. And so the same thing is true in Christian communities. And I think what's especially true is that people really depend on their faith for strength. And there are studies to show that families who are supported by a faith group and have a faith commitment are more likely to foster and adopt and are more likely to do it for longer. Burnout is a huge problem in foster care. This is such a hard job that most parents do this amazing work for a short period of time and then decide they're done with doing that, and great credit for them because it's such an incredibly hard thing. But those who have the support of a faith community are actually able to continue on for longer and serve more children. And so I think it's powerful to show those stories of people who are inspired and motivated by their faith to serve, and who really see this as an important part of who they are and how they live out their religious commitments.
And yet, the government, in many regards, seems to be pushing back against that hospitality and that offer of welcome. There was this case with Seventh-day Adventists out west, where, I mean, the questions they were asked were just inexplicable. Can you just explain a little bit about that case?
Yes, certainly. This is really an astounding case. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church actually filed a brief supporting Fulton, supporting our case, and told the story, which is just unbelievable. But this involves the Blaze family, and they are a pair of great-grandparents who live out in Washington State. And they have a great-granddaughter who's an infant, just a few months old, and who had to go into foster care. And so they said, we want to take her in. We want to care for her. If it becomes necessary to adopt her, we want to adopt her. She's our family. It's, completely understandable impulse for grandparents, and also one that is well supported in the academic evidence. There's a real push where you can to try and place a foster child with a relative or someone close, because evidence shows that they actually are better at succeeding when they're able to be kept in their own family, in a loving home. And so they went to the state of Washington and said, okay, we need a foster care license so that we can care for her. And they were asked all these hypothetical questions. Again, this is an infant, but asked about, if she was a teenager and she wanted to have a same-sex partner sleep over, would they allow that? And they said, well, we wouldn't allow any partner to sleep over. And what if she needed a gender transition? Would they support her as a teenager in a gender transition? And they said, we would love her and care for her no matter what. We would do something that's medically appropriate, but our religious beliefs are not that, you would do those sorts of invasive procedures. And we wouldn't do that on a teenager. And they were denied a foster care license and the ability to care for their own granddaughter because of these purely hypothetical questions about what could happen when she's a teenager. Again, she's an infant. Right. And so they took that to court. And at the time when we first had this discussion, they filed the brief, it was still pending. We didn't know what would happen. I'm really happy to say that just a few weeks ago, the federal court in Washington State ruled in favor of the grandparents and said, this is ridiculous. You are singling out people who have a particular set of religious beliefs. And you're doing it unnecessarily, and you're doing it in a way that is contrary to what we understand to be the science about the best outcomes for children, which are to be able to keep them with their own grandparents if they're able to do so. And so the court ordered Washington State not to discriminate against them on that basis and to let them continue with getting their classes and getting their foster care certification. And so, we're so encouraged that the court realized how unnecessary that was. But at the same time, I am discouraged that it was even necessary to have that case.
Right. Why on earth are we talking about sex with an infant? This is just insane. And also, it seems like it was 2 weeks ago where, the Democratic presidential candidate held views about same-sex marriage that are now not tolerated, never mind this transgendered stuff, which strikes me as child abuse when we're talking about children, anyhow. What else do you find encouraging in the course of having litigated this foster care case in particular?
What I have seen that's encouraging is just seeing the commitment of the foster families and the commitment of the people at Catholic Social Services to wanting to continue this work. I mean, it's been a hard fight. It's been 2.5 years now since they said no more foster placements. And yet the agency has continued to fight and say, no, we want to be able to continue this ministry. We're here. We're going to keep asking the courts to protect us. And what's really great is we've had a number of families who've stuck with Catholic Social Services. Several of them still have kids in their home. So there were children who were with them 2.5 years ago before the city shut down any more placements. And they've been able to continue caring for those children. Some of them have gone on to adopt those children. They've said, hey, we're here. We're going to continue working with you as long as we can. We are going to continue caring for these children. And, our home is open. If you are able to place more children, again, we are here and we are ready to welcome more children. We want to partner with you. And so it has been really heartening to me to just see the courage of those who are willing to persevere and willing to fight this out. And it's been really encouraging to me to hear from those who are really pulling for us in this case, and especially for other agencies around the country we've talked to who have been so supportive and who really want to see us win here because they understand what's at stake.
Mm-hmm. What coalitions, you mentioned Jewish and Seventh-day Adventists and others who filed briefs in this case. Have you seen encouraging kind of coalition kind of work?
We have, as I said, we had actually 3 different coalitions of Jewish organizations who came together to file briefs in this case, which was really exciting to see. We've seen Seventh-day Adventists, we've seen a number of different Protestant and evangelical organizations who've come together. We also had support, I was really happy to see, from a number of minority religious groups, from Muslims, from Sikhs, from the Bruderhof and others who came together who said, we have different beliefs about a lot of things, including some of the issues in this case, but we want to make sure that we have a law that actually protects religious minorities and protects us when we disagree with those who are in charge. And so, it was really heartening to see organizations who have different thoughts about a lot of these issues, but who understand that it's so important that our Constitution and our laws provide protection for religious exercise, and especially when your religious exercise is unpopular. That's when we need it most. And so it was really heartening to see that.
And you had to see during the process of the 2 years of this case, you were aware of actual children who weren't in homes because of this unnecessary process.
Yeah, it was one of the hardest things, especially when this was starting out. There were 2 really notable things that happened. And one, as I mentioned at the beginning, was that you have 250 kids who need homes and who are being stuck in institutions and not moved into family homes. And we have families, a growing number over time with empty beds in their homes who are willing to take these children in, and the city of Philadelphia won't move them. And it's heartbreaking to know that that's the case. The other case, and this was the other instance, this was spotlighted early on in what was going on in the case, was the story of a child, and we had to refer to him as Doe foster child for privacy reasons. he had been placed, he was a very young child with some special needs. And he had been placed with a mother who partnered with Catholic Social Services and, loved her, and they had this deep bond. And she was hopeful to be able to adopt him, but that hadn't happened yet. And the city said, well, we're going to place him in another home. He might be adopted there. And literally he was crying and crying out for her and trying to run back to her when he was removed. And she said, no, I want to adopt this child. I want to be able to return him. Very quickly it became apparent the other home was not going to be a place where he could stay. And so the city said, all right, we need to move him somewhere. And his foster mother, Doe foster mother, said, I want him to come back to my home. She said, bring my son home. And the city would not do it because she worked with Catholic Social Services. They would not return this boy to the mother who had cared for him longer than anyone else in his lifetime. And we went to court and said, look, you need to reopen Catholic Social Services and you need to make sure that this boy can be reunited with his foster mother. This is what you would normally do in any other case. And initially they said, just no to everything. We took them to court, and right before we got our hearing in Philadelphia, they suddenly had everybody, on the phone working on this, and were able to confirm that Doe foster mother was ready to proceed with the adoption. She had an adult child, because she's older. She had an adult child who was going to sign on with her to make sure that the boy would be cared for, if anything were to happen. And so we're able to get that together, and she was able to affirm she was ready to adopt. And so the city then did agree on the eve of going to court that he would be returned to her home. And, the happy ending to that is he was returned to her home, and she has now completed the adoption. And so he now has a forever home and a forever family. And we're so thankful for that. But it's important to know that this time of separation and trauma for both of them would not have happened had it not been for the city refusing to allow him to come back to her home and be with her family. And it just shows that it was completely unnecessary to do that. This is really putting politics ahead of the needs of children.
Did you feel during that process that anyone in the court system and the government had a sense of how inhumane this is?
I mean, it was really disheartening to see just the different roadblocks that were thrown up here. And, we were really anxious. We were really hopeful going in that the court would give us an order to reunite this mother and her son. And I'm glad to say that we were able to get that worked out before we had to go into court. And I have to say, I think a lot of that is because of the pressure of having the lawsuit and having to go into court and explain yourself,
Right.
explain why it was that you weren't reuniting this child with mother who loved him and wanted to adopt him. And so I'm so glad that it happened, but I'm really sad that it took court action for it to happen. And I should mention, this is the most egregious example, but there were a couple others as well, where initially there was a child who was not being returned to a former foster home. This happens a lot. You'll have a foster home who cares for a child, and then the child, they try and put them in a different placement, or they reunite them with their birth family for a little while, find out it's not going to work out, and children go back in the system. This is very common. When that happens, there's a premium placed on, okay, they had this foster family before, it was a good relationship, we want them to go back there. We don't need more disruption in their lives. Let's send them back there. And there was an instance of that. And there was an instance of two siblings who were separated. And, it took some extra work and phone calls and pressure on the city on the part of Catholic Social Services to be able to get those children reunited and back where they needed to be. And none of that would have been necessary if the city had just continued working with Catholic Social Services, because the ordinary thing to happen would be the caseworker says, oh yeah, they've got a foster family right here they know and love, or hey, we've got this sibling right here, let's just put him here. And it's, it's one phone call that would have happened. And instead it becomes this whole process, and you get courts involved just to do what ought to be the really obvious thing.
And do you find that people are receptive to the free to foster message that let's have more rather than less. Let's have the agency that the gay couple can go to. Let's have the agency the Catholics can go to. Let birth mothers make choices too, when we're talking about adoption and not foster care.
I do. And I find that, especially talking about some of the really unnecessary things Philadelphia did here, even people who are sympathetic to that size are like, ooh, they shouldn't have done that.
Right.
It's, it's just an obvious human recognition that, wow, that's not the way you go about things. And I also see, real understanding. And, it's encouraging to me when I see this, just we were talking about a few minutes ago that, hey, even if you don't agree with me, we can still get along together in society. And so I often do see understanding that, wow, these foster moms are really doing amazing things and they really want to do this. Why can't we just let them do this? Why can't we let them do this? And I especially have seen, heard a lot of people concerned, just as the court was, about this idea that no family had even approached Catholic Social Services and said, well, why did you need to do that? If nobody had even come to them, if nobody was complaining, why was this necessary? And so I think that is a really important part of the message, to understand that we had a system that worked.
Right.
We had a system that was serving children in Philadelphia. We had a system where LGBTQ families had options available to them and were using them and not trying to use Catholic Social Services. This is something that works. Why can't we just keep doing that?
Well, that was a really encouraging moment during the oral arguments. I think it was Justice Sotomayor actually said something like, well, it wouldn't be natural for the gay couple to go to Catholic Social Services. And I thought, bingo, that's the point. I think she inadvertently got it there.
Yeah, it was really interesting. You heard her asking about, well, is there a compromise here? And you heard Justice Breyer asking about, well, what bothers me is that nobody had even approached them about this. We heard the same point from Justice Kavanaugh as well. And so I was really encouraged to see that the court was obviously very much aware of the way Philadelphia had overstepped here. And, several justices were openly expressing concern about why it was necessary to go as far as they did. And so I think that it was certainly very encouraging to me. And I think it just shows that, people are thinking about the real human side of this story. We like to get up there as lawyers and argue about the law and how it applies, and that matters. Right. It's important, but I think it's really important to show why. It matters because there are people on the ground who are really being impacted by this. And here, the impact is on the side of these families who work with Catholic Social Services and these kids who they're able to serve.
I should just mention to the people who are watching live, there's a Q&A box that you're probably familiar with because we live by Zoom now. Feel free to put in any questions. I'm Kathryn Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I'm talking to Lori Windham from the Becket Fund about this foster care case that she just argued before the Supreme Court. Lori, you mentioned Cecilia Paul, who died in the course of these 2 years of this case. And I thought at the time that she died of a broken heart. Because this was, as you mentioned, this was her life, this was her love to care for these vulnerable children. One thing that strikes me about her, about Sharon L. Fulton, about so many of the people who this case affects is, we can't go anywhere certainly the Northeast without seeing a Black Lives Matter sign. These women are doing the work, the front lines work of making sure that Black lives matter, that they know they matter. These children know they matter and they're loved and they have a shot in life. It's as fundamental as that, whether a child has a chance or not. And can you just talk a little bit about them and what you've learned about some of these women?
Absolutely. Really incredible. And I think Sharon L., growing up as a Black woman in Philadelphia, what she said to us and, then has said publicly is, I had never experienced discrimination like the discrimination that I experienced and I felt when Philadelphia said no more foster placements. And, for her, that was deeply personal as a Black woman, as a Catholic who'd been doing this work her whole life. She had this sad and amazing story about how she got fired from her job early on because she was spending too much time with her foster kids as a foster mom. She has made incredible personal sacrifices to do this work, and to see that devalued was just heartbreaking for her. And, Toni has really spoken powerfully about her experience, growing up as a Black woman and then adopting two Black boys. And they are, like I said, they're the cutest boys. They're so much fun to play with. But she said, it opened her eyes to some of the discrimination that's out there, being the mom of two young Black boys. And she is just really concerned and confused as to why you wouldn't see that the most natural thing is to open up these homes of these moms and allow them to take in more kids and to do this work. She's a longtime foster care social worker. And so she has seen this system from the inside out and is deeply aware of all the things going on. And so for her, it's just heartbreaking to know that she wants to continue to serve her community and help her community. And this has become so much harder. There's a really beautiful piece published by Dr. Jackie Rivers in the Boston Globe as well, making exactly that point, saying, we're having this conversation about Black Lives Matter. We need to consider the lives of these children and how we can be making them better and serving them. And I thought that was really beautiful to see as well.
I'm reminded of the Little Sisters of the Poor case that you argued, because it's like the government comes in, these women are doing a ministry that most people don't even want to know about because it's too emotional and painful, and it reminds you of things that you fear or have had to experience in your own family life. They're caring for the elderly poor, and then there's this issue about contraception and abortion. They're like, leave the nuns alone, And I feel exactly like this with these mothers. Leave them alone. They're doing the work that is so hard, and that most of us don't even want to know is going on, because then we'd have to think about what our role is, right?
No, it's exactly right. And I think you're right that it's such a similar thing. You've been honored to play even a small role for the Little Sisters. And it's amazing when you go into one of their homes. Obviously, we can't do that now because of COVID, but, before, to do that, I've had those I loved and have lost who've been in nursing homes and who've suffered from dementia and lost. And, it's a heartbreaking thing to go through. But you go inside one of the Little Sisters' residences, and everything is beautiful. Everything is clean. It doesn't smell bad. And there's just this personal care and love that they show to their residents. It's just remarkable. Nobody's there just punching the clock, waiting until they're done so they don't have to do this anymore. They invest their lives in this, and they love doing it, and just seeing them in action and seeing the difference that they make in people's lives by loving and caring for those who most of us forget is powerful. And you see that and you think, why would anyone ever bother them? Like, leave them alone, let them do what they're doing. And, to pick this unnecessary fight with the Little Sisters of the Poor, it's like, why would you ever do that? And it's, as you said, it's a similar feeling, just seeing Sharon Fulton and seeing her, she says she brings the kids in and they bake a pie, and they, and they talk, and, it's very clear. It's not just about baking a pie, but it's a way to connect and get the kids to talk and show them somebody cares about them. She loves to do that. And, you see her love and care. You see her willingness to do something that's so heartbreaking. I can't imagine. You think, leave her alone. Like, just let her keep doing her great work. Why does this have to be an issue?
I should also add, for people who aren't watching on Zoom, you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook, send me an email if you would like to ask Lori a question at klopez@nationalreview.com. That's klopez@nationalreview.com, or you can tweet at me at Kathryn Lopez on Twitter. We do have one question here on Zoom. I have seen media interviews of your opponents claiming that the city of Philadelphia has had sufficient foster homes since it broke the contract with Catholic Social Services, so children are not suffering. This seems counterintuitive. Are opponents leaving out facts?
It is counterintuitive, and I'd say that's some, carefully worded statements there. We know the same week that they shut down foster care placements to Catholic Social Services, they said they had an urgent need for 300 more homes. So here they are saying, we need 300 more, and we're going to take away dozens of excellent foster homes. It doesn't add up. We also know that they acknowledged at the time, and this was at the hearing in court under oath, that they acknowledged that, yes, there are 250 kids who were in group homes. They needed to move them to family homes. but that hadn't happened. And even acknowledged that with their recruiting push they were doing, bringing in these 300, they still, at that point, when we were in court, did not have those families ready yet and had not been able to move those 250 kids in with the other families. And so, the evidence that we have here shows that there is a need, and that there are empty beds in homes with Catholic social services. And we'd have to think about what happens when a child comes in the system. If there's not a loving home, they can be put in an institution. They can be put in a group home that is not the best placement for them. Institutions and group homes generally are for kids who have some special needs or who have problems that make them unable to function in a family home. The goal there always is to try and help the child to function better so they can move to a family home. You don't want to take a child who doesn't have that kind of need and put them in an institution for kids who really have serious mental health struggles. And yet that's what happens if children enter the system and you don't have enough family homes available for them. You may also see too many children being placed in a single home and too heavy a burden on the parents because there aren't enough parents elsewhere. And so they may end up exceeding their limits for how many children are supposed to be placed in one foster home at a time. And we know these are the kinds of workarounds that exist when a system doesn't have enough family homes. And we know that at least some, and perhaps all of those, have been used by Philadelphia here.
You mentioned Jackie Rivers' op-ed. There was also a Wall Street Journal piece by Thomas Paul, one of the children who was raised by Cecilia Paul. Can you talk a little bit about his testimony and some of the children whose lives were really affected by the mothers who you represent?
It's really powerful, and I love seeing Thomas's piece. And we also have we have our website, Free to Foster, where we feature his story, among others. And you can see him on video with some of his kids. And Cecilia Paul took him into her home when he was very young and adopted him. And he, just talks about the way that it completely changed his life, that he had a loving mom who cared for him. And now has, as an adult who's grown up, who's been able to, find his way in life and have a family of his own, and the example that Cecilia was for him. And, not the only one of her children to tell a very similar story, that they had come from incredibly difficult circumstances and found a home with Mrs. Paul. In fact, she used to be a pediatric care nurse, caring for babies in NICU. And when she started, after she had children and a family and started fostering, she would specialize in taking in children who were born with drug addiction. Because she had pediatric nurse training, she was able to provide them with the care that they needed. And so she would bring in these infants with these very serious needs and nurse them and care for them and love them, and in some cases adopt them and raise them as her own. So, I mean, truly, her daughter said she was raised by a living saint. And, I have to agree with that. Just an amazing woman, an amazing story. And you talk about somebody who's dedicated their life to serving others. What an amazing example.
And literally, I mean, a child who's born addicted to drugs, and her heart goes out to them and she brings them in. I mean, this is the best of America. That's why, in some regards, I'm grateful that this case was argued the morning after Election Day, because people need to appreciate that there's so much more to life than who the president is. Obviously that's important. Just like you were saying, the legal arguments are important. And thank you for being expert in being able to do that. But my goodness, you do it for these people, for these heroes.
Absolutely. And to me, it was really powerful. And I was thinking about that on the morning of. I thought, here we are in the middle of this election that's still going on, and the counts and all that. And we've had all this national debate about the Supreme Court and everything going on. And the highest court in the land, the morning after the election, what are they doing? They're not doing the election stuff. They're not doing anything with the election. They're not doing these other things. Okay. They're hearing the case of a Black woman in Philadelphia who wants to serve kids, and a second Black woman in Philadelphia who's adopted boys and wants to serve more. They're hearing from these individuals who never imagined that they were going to be in a Supreme Court case, not something that ever crossed their minds. And yet, what a wonderful thing about our country that the morning after this national election, that's what the highest court in the land is concerned about. I thought it was really just a beautiful moment.
I did too. And I thought, also for all the fight, and I'm not going to draw you into commentary about this, but all the fight about getting Amy Barrett on the court, the most beautiful aspect of that, all politics aside, was just to see a loving family, and a loving family that, makes sacrifices to serve. And I think, because of just our attention spans and whatever the factors are, we don't get to see that all the time. And I mean, that is one of the graces of your case, I think, that people can come to know Sharon L. Fulton a bit, really know that these people exist right now in the world today. And obviously we're frustrated that the government makes life more difficult for them, but sometimes the government can remove obstacles. And that's obviously our prayer for what happens in this Supreme Court case.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think it is really powerful to know that, these women have access to the highest court in the land, hearing their case and considering it carefully. And I'm just so grateful for that. And, you talk about government removing obstacles. We talk about city officials as, being the bad guy here, because I really, strongly disagree with what they've done. But there's a way for this partnership to work and to work really well for serving kids. And I have seen it play out across the country again and again, where we hear from these foster agencies and these adoption agencies who are successful and are able to partner with the government to say, hey, when you've got these kids, bring them to us. We're here. We're ready. We're going to help. And there are examples across the country where Americans are coming together and doing exactly that work. And I'm heartened when I see that. And I hope that what we'll see at the end of this is see that happening again in Philadelphia.
And two, you make a point here about, we talked about the best of America in terms of these women, but also, we can have academic and political debates all day long about government, the role of government, and how government contracts should work, and all of these things. But here is where the government and the church can work together in a way that really, really benefits human life. And those are the aspects of this case I just think that are so encouraging for people to know about.
I think that's beautifully said. And I think that's exactly right. That, one of the great things that we've seen here is it's a place where the government realizes, what, we can't do all of this. These private groups, these religious groups have been doing it for centuries. They're really good at that. We want to partner with them to make sure we can find homes for these kids. And that's something, when it works, can work really well and can really show some of the best things about our country. And so that's something that I hope we'll see continue in Philadelphia and in many other places across the country as well.
I also often wonder about religious liberty, if part of the reason people can't seem to hear our cries here is because what they see of Christianity is, the McCarrick Report. It's not Sharon L. Fulton. It's not the frontline work. It'll be the scandal story. That's why I first started focusing so much on foster care and adoption. It was driving me crazy that the only times we heard about it was some terrible case, or when there was this conflict with LGBT rights or something. And there's a whole nother story to tell beyond those conflicts. And that's where we can meet, right? Whatever our views are on marriage or different things.
I think that's beautifully said. And that's exactly right. This is a place where people can come together and say, yes, this is the work we want to see people doing and the way we want to support them. And, I think it has been really clear too with COVID, with all the difficulties and things going on. We have really seen the church, and we've really seen religious people step up to do that work. Catholic Social Services was talking about the Archdiocese of Philadelphia has distributed over 1 million meals to people in need during COVID. They've been out distributing laptops to students to be able to help them with their distance learning. And, it's really beautiful to see how we can come together to serve our communities and to reach and to serve those in need. And I think it's a really powerful testimony as to, what the Catholic Church can do, what religious communities across America can do to serve. And I think that, so many of us have seen that powerfully illustrated in the last few months. During times of tragedy and heartbreak is often when religious communities really show what I believe are their true colors,
Right.
which is the love and care that they have for their fellow man.
Lori, what is the greatest joy of doing the work that you do, and what motivates you to do it?
I'm just so blessed to be able to work with Becket. It's an amazing group of people, attorneys who really love what they do and want to do their best, but amazing clients, to get people from, not from this case, to see Sharon Ellen and Tony and to talk to them, and to talk to Tony right after the argument was powerful, but it was also special. I had, Melissa Buck from Michigan, who's a client, out there texting me the morning of to let me know she was praying. I had Sister Constance from the Little Sisters of the Poor sending me an email to let me know that she's praying for me. This isn't their case, but they care and they understand why this is so important. And that to me is so beautiful, is to see these women who are powerful and who are strong and who stand up to do good work, and seeing them come and support each other in this. That was just, it's really touching. And you think, yes, this is why I get up and do this in the morning.
Actually, when you argued the second Little Sisters case, I happened to be with the Sisters of Life that week in DC, and they had mass for you, and we're praying rosaries for you. And I am so moved by how many people come together around these issues.
It's been, it's just been amazing to see people come together. It takes an enormous team and a huge effort to be able to do these cases, and it's exciting when, I've been able to do in Fulton, others have been able to do in other cases, to stand up and argue. It's really an exciting moment, but it takes a huge team of people to make that happen. And I'm just so grateful to everybody who's been coming together to work on that.
Well, I want to do a little commercial for the Becket Fund too, because as you know, I'm friends with a number of people at the Becket Fund, but I'm friends with them because they're the salt of the earth. I'm just struck by how beautiful so many of the people who work at the Becket Fund are, and it's sort of the opposite. If people took a tour in no COVID times of your office, it's probably the opposite of the caricature that people might have about religious liberty lawyers, sitting around waiting for, looking for somebody to sue or something. I don't know what the caricature is, to be honest with you, but you're people who excel at what you do, but at heart love America and love freedom and love people, and want them to be free, whatever their beliefs are, to be truly free.
Well, thank you so much. It's, I'm honored to be there, because it is a group of people who are committed to being excellent and being the best at what they do, but also who come from very different backgrounds and religious commitments. And, we can, have we have disagreements, but we come together as a team, and we are excited to do this work, and we're excited to work together and serve our clients, and clients we agree with and clients we have different beliefs from. We want to be able to be there and do that. And it's a great organization, and, really a terrific group of people who just understand that we do this and we care about it. And, we also want to be good and kind human beings to one another, and make this, a good place to be. And I think that makes your work better. And I'm just so thankful for my colleagues who are, terrific lawyers and administrators and comms people and everything else, and also fantastic human beings.
And I'm not being too Pollyannish, am I, to think that you're a sign of hope that the Becket Fund has been as successful as it has in the courts in recent years, at a time where culturally it looks like we're so divided. I think that Becket, well, obviously you've been successful in the courts, but I think you also represent the heart of America in many regards. I don't think that the polarization I see on the New York City streets is necessarily, everyone here.
Well, that's really kind to say, and thank you. But, it is encouraging to me that we see people come together, and, people argue and they fight on social media, but when you're really talking to somebody face to face, as much as we can do that these days, and one-on-one, you see that people understand that these issues are hard and that people are different and we have to find a way to work together. And I think it's really beautiful when you do get to see that.
Well, Lori, thank you in a particular way for this work on this case, because these vulnerable children need a voice, and I sort of think that doing foster care work is like being in the military, in the sense that it's a limited population that knows what that world is. And so again, one of the blessings of this case is that more people are paying attention, more people, it's a window into this world. I know that suffering that the families, the women, the children have had to face is not going to go to waste, because more people are aware and will continue to be aware over the course until we have a decision.
And I'm so thankful for you, Kathryn, for continuing to talk about this and put this front and center, because I think it is really powerful. And when you see the stories of these amazing women and men who are doing this work, I really hope that it continues to inspire others to do that as well, because it really is incredible.
And and to support agencies like Catholic Social Services
Absolutely.
and St. Vincent's in Michigan and so many others. Well, Lori Windham, thank you so much for your time. I know you've had incredibly busy weeks here. Thank you for the excellent job you did at the Supreme Court. It was just beautiful and powerful, and you're some of the best of America yourself. So thank you, Lori, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll have another episode of this Frida Foster Fridays series next Friday at 1. And you, of course, thank you if you're watching it not live. One of the blessings of these Zoom calls are they live on, and people can watch them whenever they are. So thank you for doing so. And thanks again, Lori.
Thank you so much, Kathryn. It's been so great to talk. And thank you again for all you've done to bring attention on these issues.
Okay.